Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first session of our MLA's PDS Updates webinar series. I'm Alana McEwen, the Project Manager for the Producer Demonstration Site program, and it's wonderful to have you joining us today. This new webinar series is designed to share insights, progress, and learnings emerging from our PDS projects across the country. With each session, we'll highlight a different producer-led project, showcase practical innovations, and give you the chance to hear directly from the people working on the ground to drive productivity and sustainability outcomes. Apologies for the confusion with the start time. We will ensure that we have this clearer in future events. But to today's webinar, so Unlocking Potential, More Lambs from Ewe Lambs, we'll dive into the topic that continues to gain momentum across the sheep industry. Many of you will know that achieving consistently high reproductive performance from ewe lambs can be challenging. So across several PDS projects, producers and collaborators are demonstrating the practical application of proven management strategies, complementing ongoing research in this area to support better conception rates, stronger lamb survival, and more lambs weaned from ewe lambs. We're very fortunate to be joined by one of the project leaders and a couple of our producers today who will walk us through the latest findings, the practical changes being implemented, and what producers are learning on their properties. There will be 10 to 15 minutes of question time at the end. We ask that you please add your questions to the chat as we go, and we'll answer as many of them as we can today. Any questions we do not get to, we will circulate a response to next week. And I would just like to add that this webinar is being recorded and will be distributed to all registered participants next week. So with that, it's my pleasure to hand over to Jason Trompf of JT AgriSource, who will take us through the results and insights from the More Lambs from Ewe Lambs work. Jason, over to you.
Thanks very much, Alana, and thank you for all your efforts. Has been the odd stressful call when you have 700 registrations, which is really exciting. A huge effort from Alana and others in the background. And while I'm thanking those that helped me in this space, there's probably two others in particular, other than the MLA input to both the research work done in More Lambs from Ewe Lambs, Daniel Ford and co, and then through the PDS extension, Alana and Russell and the team. The other two I'd like to mention in particular is at the research level, Murdoch Uni and AgVic, particularly Andrew Thompson, if he happens to be online. He's been very passionate about this area for over 20 years, and years ago on a shoestring budget, he was driving work in this area. So great respect to Tomo, and there's many slides and pieces of analysis that go back to his work. And the last one, and I'll round this out again at the very end, most of the work we do these days is through, even at research level, serious collaboration with producers. I've got a couple on this hookup today that have spent many man hours contributing to that. And to all the others out there that are listening that have been part of this, really respect your input. The reason why we have 700 farmers online or people of interest online is we have a 100-year low in our flock. Steve Bignell and the intentions team measuring the pulse out there. Over half of the producers want to build their flock, and if that was executed in perfection, that would deliver a 10% increase pretty quick in our national flock. And people are looking to ewe lambs as a major contributor for that. And I kind of want to let you down lightly early. If you venture into ewe lambs half-baked, it ain't going to be the panacea that rebuilds your flock in a hurry. So I want to talk you through that from a realist lens. But before we get right into it, I'd like to introduce the More Lambs from Ewe Lambs PDS. It's a 6-year project running from 2023 to 2028. It's co-funded by MLA and Lambs Alive, a network of mine, and obviously in-kind producers contribution. Goes over 3 regions in Western Vic, Southern New South and Southeast South Australia. And it's extending the research work we've been working on over the last few years with MLA, and Daniel Ford's looking forward to a final report in the next month or so with a best practice guide that'll come out around ewe lambs. So I think you are all a ready audience that have volunteered to say you'd be interested in that content. The aim of the PDS is to equip producers to make more informed decisions around ewe lambs. It isn't a push to get you to join ewe lambs. In fact, it's saying we need to weigh up where we're at. Is it appropriate for you to do it? And if so, we need to build skills and confidence to enable you to yield more from ewe lambs, but doing it by adopting best practice right throughout preparation for joining, conception, pregnancy, lambing, delivering improved welfare and lamb survival outcomes in a really balanced way, and then recovering that ewe lamb so that, you know, she delivers the goods on the second joining. So it does require, this ewe lamb game does require really proactive rather than reactive management. It's kind of like for all those graduates that are out there online that have learnt that in their adult ewes through things like lifetime ewe management. It's that again on steroids to get ewe lambs to work properly. You know, and I don't mean that in the sheep sense. I mean that the asset on you as a manager. You know, it really requires attention to detail. There's huge room for improvement, which I'm about to present, but check in first and make sure there's not other more fruitful options for you on your farm, like getting your time of lambing right, driving your meat production per hectare through your adult ewes and all that, and make sure your 2-year-old lambing is delivering the goods before you go bringing in a new cohort. So there's a lot of things to weigh up, but let's assume that ewe lambs is what you're interested in. You know, let's hook into it. We did a national survey as part of the research with MLA on ewe lambs in particular, and shout out to Kimball Curtis for the work he did here. And basically, it showed that 23% of producers regularly join ewe lambs and another 10% opt in and out. And I think it's fair to say that they're opting in at the moment based on, you know, their interest in this forum and Steve Bignell's work with the intentions team. The average marking rate from ewe lambs joined is around 76%. The mortality rate of the ewe lamb herself is about 6%, and I'll talk more about this later. What's challenging, though, with this cohort of sheep is to get accurate information around things like lamb survival, because not all of the ewe lambs being mated are pregnancy scanned, and that in itself is a real challenge, because what my research and extension work is going to show, unless you're managing them as still a developing young ewe, but is carrying a pregnancy and hopefully wanting to bear a live lamb, the moment that they conceive and you can test that through the scanning crate, they need to be managed separately. And often ewe lambs are running with other age groups in that later lambing in the season. And so rarely can we get specific data on this cohort and accurate data. And that's what's required a lot of work with, I don't know how many farmers in the R&D, there'd be 50 plus farmers that have contributed to us measuring their flocks over time and collecting this data across, I should emphasize, a range of breeds. There's a lot of maternal composite data, but there is merino data and there is a number of shedding flocks as well. So there's been work done across all those different breed types. There's a whole range of barriers to adopting ewe lambs, and we could spend a whole preso on this in itself. So it's just worth mentioning that there's a number of concerns people have, legitimate concerns like more lambing difficulties. Will they be poor mothers? Higher mortality rates? You know, are they mature enough to do it? Well, they are if you hit your targets and manage them right. They aren't. A lot of those barriers will come to fruition. Those concerns will end up a reality if you don't proactively manage them and set them up for success. That's all I'd like to say about this slide at that point, and we might circle back around on that. I wished I had all of you in a workshop room, because this is where we can have some fun. And honestly, I want you to contemplate in your room, and I'm giving a shout out. I know there's a crew down Dunkeld way that are sitting around a large screen, a few around the room. I want you to ask yourselves the question, what percentage of the ewe lambs that you join actually rear a lamb? So the moment we're putting them to the ram, we've got this intent that we want them to then behave as a ewe. And I define reproductive success as not just getting pregnant. We want her to then stay alive, function well, rear her lamb, and be there to bat up for the next round. And it's a really interesting question. It's not the lambing percentage. It's not the lamb survival out of ewe lambs. It's simply asking per 1,000 or per 100 ewe lambs you join, how many actually behave like a ewe ultimately then as a maternal animal and conceive, stay alive, and their lambs, at least one lamb stays alive. And if I do a stock take on where I think this is at the moment using the data we've collected per 1,000 ewes, I'll cut to the quick of the slide because my wife reckons often I've got to get straight to the detail. Reality is about 50% of the ewe lambs joined ultimately behave as a ewe and rear a lamb. So regularly 25% scan dry. We know from the work we've done in the national survey and my on-farm work that the mortality rate of the ewe lamb herself in that first year of her production is around 6%. We apply the average survival rates, which I'm going to get to in detail in a moment, of about 70% survival of single-born lambs and around 60% for twin-born lambs. What's presented here is the number that completely lamb and lose. So it's the opposite to those stats I just quoted, and we apply that through. It means in aggregate, 500 of the 1,000 ewe lambs that were joined either didn't get pregnant, they pass away themselves, or all their lambs are lost, either one or two. And at the end of the day, that's our challenge. It's our national challenge, to be honest, even with our adult ewe flock. The equivalent number in the adult ewe flock is about a 65 to 70% strike rate. So for everyone out there trying to rebuild your flocks and create more, focus before you buy another truckload of ewes on the latent potential that's sitting there in your existing flock base, because in adults it's possible to lift that number up towards 90% of the ewes that are joined actually rearing, and in ewe lambs we can lift this number from 50 up towards 80% of them no problem rearing a lamb at the end of the day, that and more. So in the light of that, I'm going to start to get into some of the detail. First of all, it's focusing on the joining end. And what I want to qualify here is this is important, but I think up till now as an industry, we've almost overemphasized this, with the point being that the focus has been on joining and success being then the scanning rate. And I'm going to present you a bit of information on the drivers of that reproductive rate or scanning rate. But to be honest, the real acid test in ewe lambs is to be able to create potential and then convert it. That's what we've got to get better at. And so if you want to create more potential, more fetuses, I'll show you a couple of graphs from Tomo's work. Weight at joining is critical. Condition score has a role to play. Weight change has a role to play. Age at joining has a role to play. The one I won't present any graph on is the birth status of the ewe lamb herself. Great piece of analysis that Andrew did shows that ewe lambs that are born a multiple compared to the ones that are born a single will deliver, a multiple born ewe lamb will deliver the same scanning rate as the single born ewe lamb at 5 kilos lower joining weight. So there's some real efficiency in there and some real opportunity. Other areas of opportunity, there'll be some people online from the genetics team. If you want to improve reproductive rate in ewe lamb, directly select on the traits that influence that, like yearling weaning rate, yearling conception, yearling litter size, yearling ewe rearing ability. But there are other correlated traits like post-weaning weight, P-fat, some negatively correlated traits for the merino listeners like higher wrinkle and higher wool cut. So you need to weigh all this up in your breeding objective. Ewe lambs are quite seasonal. So we've done a lot of work and not many of them will conceive if the ram's going in before about 15th or 20th of February. They can be up to weight and ticking all these boxes and you're trying to join them in the middle of summer and it won't work well. Teasing for 2 weeks prior to joining is an absolute must. And lifting your ram percentages above your adult joining ram percentages, which might often be around 1%, getting them up towards 3%. They have a shorter estrus cycle that's a fickle estrus cycle to nutrition and other influences, and they're less precocious, so they won't seek out the ram as well. So you need more ewe and ram contact, and containment pens can be great for mating ewe lambs. So if I go into some of the science on the joining side of things, one of Tomo's great papers outlines that for every kilo extra in weight at the start of joining, we'll conceive 3 to 5% extra fetuses per kilo of joining weight. A lot of data in the data set contributed from New Zealand, heaps of composites and a lot of merinos, and we're building more and more on the shedders. Reality is all the animals we've looked at are living in this 3 to 5% range. I will say the merinos appear to be at the higher end, 4 to 5%. And, you know, and the composites, for example, there'll be a lot of people listening with them are probably averaging around the same number. I'm going to get to a slide in a minute, though, that's going to be an important return serve from me to you to say it's not that hard with your EID tags to weigh them at the start of joining, link that to a scanning result and plot your own line. It's the very first activity in Lifetime U because we found in adults per condition score, the average is plus 20, but we've got flocks out there that are plus 40 in the adults. So if you got some flocks in your time of joining your genotype that are outside of these boundaries and influence the cost benefit of investment in feeding. So best you measure your own and see what's happening. I won't labour too much here. Another brilliant piece of analysis that was done, and a shout out to Lyndon Kubel. Him and I did some work years ago that contributed to this starter set, condition scoring a lot of ewe lambs. And we found condition score absolutely has a role to play. And up to sort of 3.3, 3.5, half a condition score extra lifts the reproductive rate by about 20%. But if you're only joining a proportion of your flock on a weight basis, what our analysis shows and Tomo's research shows is that basically assessing them for condition score over and above weight will only improve things by a couple of percent if you're joining a portion of your group. So the simple message out of that is we can focus in on a weight basis if you're joining a subset of your ewe lambs. This is where it gets interesting, and I want people to listen closely here. This is a piece of work that was done on a very responsive genotype in Western Australia, Merino genotype. Some of the earlier work Andrew did looking at the impact of growth rate during joining on scanning rates. And he found that for every 100 grams extra of growth rate while the rams were in it, lifted scanning rate about 20%. One of the significant gaps we had going into the most recent research project is the same work had not been done in maternal or shedding breeds. And what we found was if you focus on the traffic light system here of a 45 kilo ewe lamb, either grown at 50 grams, going to amber 150 and green 250, for every 100 grams extra growth rate, it was delivering around 8% improvement in scanning, which is less than half the merino response. This is another reason why I want you to do some measurement on your own farm of that responsiveness back on joining weight. And if you really want to get into it, growth rate during joining, and get some help to do your analysis, and you'll come up with both of these numbers on your farm. What's interestingly, out of this, if we flow with the last response, where for every extra 100 grams of growth during joining, we only get an 8% gain in reproductive rate, and we compare that to a flock that's giving you a 4% gain in scanning rate per kilo of joining, we've got two choices with your resources here. We hold back on some grain and grow them quicker during joining, which is the top line, delivering an 8% gain, or we say we're going to grow these quicker before the ram goes in, so they're 3.5 kilos heavier over that same 35 days, and at 4 kilos, 4% per kilo, that's a 14% lift in scanning rate. So in other words, the investment is better off doing the hard work early. The other key point that's about to come in my slides is to compensate for every 5 kilograms lower that we are at joining, you need to gain an extra 10 to 15 kilos during pregnancy to get the same ewe and lamb survival. So this is a pivot point in my presentation to say we've got to shift our emphasis away from scanning being the end game to setting these ewe lambs up for success, and do the hard yards early is the message. Because when we look at at the overall scanning, leaning into that average marking rate that was in the survey of 500 farmers, you can see that we're going from a potential per 100 ewe lambs of 115, we're marking 75, which unfortunately represents 40 lambs lost per 100 ewe lambs joined, which is about a 35% loss. If you're interested in the detail, the survival figures sitting behind that is 69% single survival from ewe lambs and 62 for twins. So that's marking a bit over 120% in a mob of twins. So I think every listener online would say, wow, we've got some scope here to improve and we can do this better. And if you're wondering why, there's two primary causes of that loss. And number one is birth weight, and number two is mismothering. And what we then, so I can say that up front now, what eluded us to that was some really interesting work we did. First of all, using the Cashmore-Oakley database and analysis of a seed stock database that had a lot of information, and a shout out to them for contributing that data. And what we found was that the biggest driver of the birth weight of the lamb out of a ewe lamb is the ewe lamb's joining weight. Absolutely critical. So if we're going to lift birth weight and therefore survival, we need to set this ewe lamb up, and there'll be listeners online focusing in, for example, and they know in their environment, if their lambs are low 4 kilos or less, it's a real challenge for that light birth weight lamb to get up and survive, keep itself warm in a really high chill index environment. Straight away, you can see that we need to be up towards those joining weights that are more like 45, 50 to get adequate birth weights to drive survival. Joining weight also drove additive on top of birth weight. It drove weaning weight through improved lactation. So this is part of what we learned in the seed stock data. What was really interesting, if there's people out there that have read that paper, and it says in that paper that we weren't able to see any relationship between the joining weight of the ewe lamb and the survival of her herself. And we dug a bit deeper because Cashmore-Oakley, like many other seed stock operations, are collecting lambing ease scores. And when we included that in the analysis, what it revealed was that the lower the joining weight of the ewe lamb, the greater the percentage that had lambing difficulties. And the difference between a seed stock farm and our commercial farms is often there's not people there right at that immediate moment of lambing. And that's where, unfortunately, some of the wastage is coming in. So you can see again, if you want to mitigate ewe loss, the seed stock data was suggesting that we need to lift the joining weights for both ewe and lamb survival. So then we went out and did a whole heap of work on farm. In the interest of time, I'm not going into all the background of how we did it. But basically, what we were able to do was split groups of scan single and scan twin ewe lambs into different nutrition profiles. And with the collaboration of farmers like the two that are coming up, we were able to generate different profiles, which is the first test of this sort of research. And then further, we were able to see real differences from that. Before I go to the detail of this slide, one thing we did find that's different to adult ewes is that the impact, or the coefficient, if we use that language, that the impact of nutrition in early pregnancy, its impact on lamb birth weight out of ewe lambs was no different to late pregnancy. In the adult research, we found it was about 1/3 early, 2/3 late. So that's enabled us, because there was no difference in the early or the latter phase, the way we will be extending these messages about the need to feed and grow this ewe lamb during pregnancy. It's a whole of pregnancy weight gain, starting from rams in to your pre-lamb treatments at about day 135. That's what all these measurements have been taken over. So implementing what we learnt with the seed stock data, looking at the impact, but this is on commercial farms and lots of replication. What we've been able to find is that the combination of joining weight and pregnancy weight gain is what drives ewe and lamb survival. So using the traffic light system again here, you can see that moving from red through to, say, if you were happy at a not happy, but comfortable with around that 2%, 3% sort of ewe loss, which is half the national average. Or if you want to get into the really green zone, like less than 2% of the ewes lost, you can see the different combinations. What I want you to remember in this Prezzo is 45 plus 15. And I know there'll be listeners saying, wow, my adult ewes only weigh 60 something kilos. This 60 kilos at the point of pre-lambing is a total weight of that ewe lamb, including the conceptus. So, for example, if I map that out and we went with 45 plus 10, that means that ewe lamb is 55 kilos just pre-lambing, and she's going to drop out of her at the point of lambing most likely over 10 kilos of conceptus. So she goes, that's fetus and fluid. So she goes back from 55 weighing, that amber coloured ewe, back to 45. And most people around your room are going to look at each other and say, wow, I can understand why we need to develop these animals more so they're big enough to first of all get pregnant, but stay alive themselves through the lambing process and bear a viable live lamb. If we want to look at it on a lamb survival basis with the same combination and the same technique, red, amber, green, to get into the green zone here, you have to be marking, or you're targeting marking 150% plus from a mob of twins, or a 75% survival. The amber zone's in that sort of 130 to 150, 125 to 150, and the red is less than 120, which we saw regularly in different combinations of the trial sites. What I want to draw attention to here is one site I can vividly remember that was so focused on birth weight. They're using low birth weight rams. They're worried about feeding their ewes, and their low nutrition treatment with that combination delivered a marking rate out of twins of 80%. So that's a 40% survival. And so you can dial up the numbers to see where those animals roughly sat on that graph. So an important point that's coming from one of the case study farmers in a moment, he's going to say to you that their ewe lambs can get pregnant at light weights. Getting pregnant is not the measure of success. Being able to have reproductive success, pregnant, stay alive and rear a lamb, is where it counts. If I continue to scroll through this and I present some single data, there'll be people listening thinking, oh, that's okay. But for singles, we must be running into dystocia problems. Well, interestingly, I want to contextualize this. Tens of thousands of records, our average survival of single-born lambs out of ewe lambs averaged 69%, and there was no difference between breeds. So less than 70% marked. And interestingly, in singles, birth weight was still the critical factor. So you can see here, by having ewe lambs developed enough that they develop a decent placenta right from the moment they conceive, they can transfer adequate nutrient to the lamb as well as grow themselves, it's still an issue in singles. So 45 plus 15 is where you're going to deliver a single lamb survival rate that nearly equals your adults. If you want to do 40 plus whatever and lamb down, under 60 kilos, under 50 kilos, sorry, you're going to have, a 65 to 70% marking rate. And that's what's unfortunately been quite common. So we're not meeting the growth requirements during pregnancy, which, if you turn it into grams per day, need to be at least 125, but more like 150 grams a day in that phase for both singles and twins. In the best practice guide that we're going to come out with in the next month or two, and I can feel Daniel Ford smiling here in the final milestone report we've got, we're going to actually use this terminology of reproductive success, where that brings in the fact that they get pregnant, they stay alive themselves, and they rear at least one lamb. And I've thrown up one for the flavour of the audience here. And what this is saying is, if we achieve 45 plus 15 here, 85% of the ewe lambs that scan twin will have stayed alive themselves as a ewe lamb and reared at least one live lamb. Unfortunately, we're back more in the red and amber zone on an average basis at the moment as an industry. So there's lots of scope for improvement. And the exciting thing here was we're swimming together. We're driving production improvement and improved welfare outcomes as well. And that's a great story for the industry. I'm feeling that a few people are listening to some of these absolute weights and concerned, and I'm sorry about all the text on this slide, but it's just grabbed out of one of our current reports. We're doing some research where we're going back to a number of sites where we have all this base data on the ewe-lamb and measuring them as an adult. And we've had a whole range in standard reference weights from 55 through to 78. That's a condition score 3 at 3 years plus. That's varied in shedders down around 60 to merinos around 65 and maternals around 68. And what we're doing is reanalyzing all their data, and we'll come up potentially with information like this when it's ratified in the best practice guide. So this is based on a 68 kilo maternal flock, and instead of expressing it as an adult, like an absolute starting weight, the second column has it as a proportion of standard reference weight. And you can see then the dry singles twins that are yielded from that. And interestingly, I think to deliver reproductive success, not just scanning outcomes like this slide, the outcome's going to be in the order of 65 to 70% of your standard reference weight at the point of joining. But we've got more critiquing to do, and I can feel Gav Carney cringing that I've even thrown up a number yet, because his computer's working hard on this at the moment. So we're hoping to relate all this information to genotypes with a wide range of standard reference weight. I said initially that there was another key area that causes some loss, and that's mismothering. And a whole lot of work's been done that's shown that adults are sensitive to the number of ewes in the mob and the number of lambs weaned at marking, or some number of lambs marked. And ewe lambs are about 4 times more sensitive. So for every 100 ewe lambs less, we'll mark 4% more in a mob of singles, and then about 13 or 14% more in a mob of twins. So in the best practice guide, there'll be things like this little table that has the optimum mob sizes for ewe lambs, and you can see there it's typically a proportion of around half of what we've been extending in the adult optimum mob size at different stocking rates and so on. So pretty exciting information coming your way. I just want to have a dose of reality, and then I'm going to go to Andrew Hunter. There was a great group of farmers that have been part of this PDS. We've surveyed their practices. These are the Western Victorian cohort. They were joining 1,500, whole range of practices you can see there. And what's interesting, what I'm interested in, is the principles they're applying. Three quarters of them had a start joining weight. Of that 3/4, 60% of them had a minimum critical mating weight, which was 42. So in other words, half of a reasonably already educated group of farmers had a bit of a target, but it's a bit behind where it needs to be. And we've got to extend that through the others that don't have a minimum critical mating weight. Most of them were scanning, which is great. Most of them were trying to intervene with an abortive agent like Campylobacter and vaccinating, but none of them were weighing during pregnancy or pre-lambing. So how do you measure an animal's growth rate if you're not monitoring it? So that's our extension task. And what you can see there is of ewe lambs joined, this group's a bit above the average. They were marking 84%. The survival rates were still similar. For every 3 ewe lambs or fetuses conceived, they marked about 2 of them, so 67% survival. So the rules of engagement for ewe lambs, you've got to thoroughly evaluate the pros and cons, make sure it suits your genotype, your production system, your labour availability. You can't do it half-baked. One of the practices I want to challenge online here is this concept of over-joining. So you'll join extras in the hope you're going to get extra lambs and extra ewes contributing to maybe a depleted flock. I say less is more. Do a proper job on the cohort that meets the targets and learn how to do it that way through proactive management for that first 1.5 or 2 of that ewe's life to set her up for a first and second lambing. And our focus has to be on conversion. of that potential into live lambs, because that's where the opportunity lies. What I'd like to do now is to bring forward one of the farmers that have been part of all this journey, in Andrew Hunter from Huron Creek. Andrew, you're online. We need to get him off mute if he can manage it. So while Andrew's joining us, he's based in southern New South Wales around Huron Creek. Are you there, Andrew?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
I can, absolutely. Thanks heaps for joining us. Tell us what you do at home.
Yeah, we're sort of pretty much all just a self-replacing maternal composite flock. Join about that 3,500 adult ewes, around about the 800 ewe lambs. We've got a target we've been trying to achieve of 7,000 lambs on the ground. Haven't quite got there yet. The highest we got to is sort of 6,700. Target we're aiming towards, and then you try to take those lambs right through to as bigger slaughter weights as we can, sort of targeting either the top end of the supermarket or turning them off as heavy lambs, but yeah, finishing all our own lambs.
And you mentioned, Andrew, right up early there, you mentioned a couple of numbers and a target. You're pretty passionate about meat production per hectare and your profitability, and I assume you're doing some measuring of that, no doubt.
Yeah, John Francis had been pestering me for years to join his benchmarking program. I've been a bit nervous just in case we got found out, but eventually gave in. Done that now for 3 or 4 years, and John's work sort of places us. You're right up at the elite end of their meat production per hectare per 100 millimetres of rain, and also our gross profit per hectare out of our enterprise. So yeah, we're confident we're pulling a few right ropes after all this time.
I know you're saying that humbly, but I think it's a great case study to start with, because you're focused on 101, what really counts, but we're trying to find a way of where ewe lambs fit into that. Can you talk to me a bit about how that's rolled with the ewe lambs so we'll reflect on the past first and then we'll come to the present. What in that sort of system, which listeners are crystal clear on, how's it been working previously?
Yeah, the ewe lambs, I guess, to some extent, been the poor relation a little bit. We've always been focused on just making sure we were turning out those lambs, slaughter lambs at your maximum weight, and often quite late in the season. So we were a little bit catch as catch can with our ewe lambs. We always only joined off our ewe lambs that were born as a multiple, so either from a scan twin or a scan triple mob, and you're born in our first pulse of lambs. We have we scan our lambings into 3 different pulses, so they're the right age and they're multiple born, but often we weren't that sort of focused on their size and their weight. Yeah, they're a bit the poor relative.
And so if we go into some of the detail on your changes in KPIs with ewe lambs, we can certainly see. So the data on the left side here represents the past, and the data on the right-hand side represents the present. You've changed a few things for sure, yeah?
Yeah, we've done some work over time. We've looked at our weights of our ewe lambs at joining and compared that to consumption and compared that to our conception rates. We do have pretty fertile sheep which will join right down to quite low weights, so that had probably led to us being not quite as focused on their weight at joining time as what we needed to be. We were finding they join up sort of anything, they join up sort of reasonably well from 38 odd kilos, but we're getting our best results, we thought, for anything around about that 42 kilos. So we were quite content for them to be that bit smaller. Last couple of years, we've bumped it up to that 45 kilos, and we've actually gone through the group and not joined anything that was less than 45 kilos when the rams went in. And then I guess like what you talked about, we've been a bit bloody paranoid about lambs getting too big inside the ewe lambs. So if anything, we've tried to restrict the weight of the ewe lambs back at lambing time. Until last year, again, when we've come into the program and tried to bump that up to make sure they're at least at 60 kilos at 2 to 3 weeks out from lambing.
And we can all see the results there, like particularly your shift in twin lamb survival's profound, where you're marking low hundreds, you're now nudging, 150, which is real. And I know you told me you had a few individual mobs that obviously exceeded that average. Just in closing, Andrew, tell us what the experience of the lambing was like, less about the data, but more about what last year's lambing was like with that preparation compared to in the past.
Yeah, that's probably been the real quantum shift, I reckon. Yeah, I'd actually got to the point, really personally, where lambing down ewe lambs was really becoming quite challenging. Yeah, just the number of lambs we were needing to pull and your prolapses and your ewe lamb deaths. Yeah, they were more than what I thought was acceptable. So we were even getting to the point of considering not joining our ewe lambs and you're running them through for the extra 11 or 12 months before we joined them. But last year was a real sort of quantum shift. We had much lower ewe deaths, barely any prolapse at all, and that particularly the much better lamb survival rates in the multiple flocks. Yeah, so it was very a gratifying result, and it just took a real bloody weight off our shoulders in terms of knowing we're doing the right thing.
No, a bit less stressful. And I think it's a great message to people that are listening. You can do both. You can drive production and drive your system, but you can, really look after the animal and do it well. So it's a win-win, absolutely. And I thank you for your time and your contribution. I'd like to change to Charlie de Fegely now if he's online. So we're shifting from southern New South Wales to southwest Victoria. My slides not progressing for some reason.
G'day, Tromphy.
Yeah, mate, I'm just having a challenge progressing my slide. I'm not quite sure why. I might escape.
Don't ask me.
Yeah. Anyway, mate, tell us what you do in deep southwest Victoria.
Well, our system's very similar to Andrew Hunter's. We produce a 24, 25 kilogram carcass lamb, largely aimed at the supermarkets. We lamb in August.
All good, Charlie. Keep going.
Yeah, we lamb in August, late July, August, September. And we're not trying to beat the spud growers around Ballarat with their big 35 kilogram lambs. In fact, we give them 3 months head start and still knock them off most of the time for growth rates. But
just a tad competitive. Now, tell us about your flock numbers and your plan for this year, just so people have got a bit of a balance of what you're doing.
Lizzie and I set out a target, that's my wife and I set out a target several years ago to have 10,000 breeding ewes, of which we were determined that we wouldn't have anything more than 25% in ewe lambs. Our target is 20. And if we need extra numbers, I'd prefer to keep an older age cohort than increase that percentage of ewe lambs to try and increase the size of the number of lambs. So we cut our numbers back a little bit with the dry last 2 years, but we're nearly back up on track now. And,
so you're just pushing that threshold a little bit this year in ewe lambs, but in future it'll be more like a couple of thousand of them and around 8,000 adults to get the balance you're talking about.
Correct. Yeah. So what we've done is we've put up 3,200 ewe hoggets, and we're now weighing them regularly. And 40s are cut off at the moment. And if they're not 40, they don't even go towards the ram. Then we split them between 40 to 47 and then 47 and up and put them on different feed regimes to make sure that we don't really mate anything under 45. Our target's 47. Occasionally, some of the ewe lambs that are in that mix might be a bit lighter, but we've got a lamb finishing system where they can go into to make sure they get to their right weight.
And so I've gone to the KPI slide that presents a bit of the past and the present. And so what Charlie just talked through then is he's weighed them now, and stuff that's above 40 is getting another 3 weeks of opportunity to set up for rams in, and he's got them growing at different rates. Used to have a minimum joining closer to 40, but now he's up at that 47 or 8. What are some of the things you've seen as a result, if you summarize it, the changes, the benefits, reflecting on what was happening to what is happening now?
Well, I'm a bit like Andrew. I can now go for a holiday during the ewe lambs lambing, because with the bigger weights, we hardly get any dystocia. We don't get any prolapse as much. But yes, it's become a breeze. I agree with Andrew. When they're at low weights, lambing ewe lambs was hell. The ewe deaths is the big one. We're losing now less than 1%. And it's a combination of different factors that are causing that. But the big one, Tromphy, is the rejoining as a second lammer. You know, the boys and I say that it's a ewe lamb is a ewe lamb until it's virtually pre-tested in its second year of lambing. And you can't take your eye off them. And there's no point having a 150 scanning in your ewe lambs and then a 90% in your second lammers. So you've failed. And so we're concentrating on the 2 age groups, ewe lambs, and then the next one up with feeding right now.
Yeah, and that's really exciting. And what does excite me is, and we don't have the time here to go back, but the matrix that I presented to get down to less than 1% of ewe mortality, that tells me that he's achieving those targets of a higher joining and a higher pregnancy weight gain. What he's experiencing on farm is it validating our research, which is what a PDS is built for. And it's just a brilliant outcome. And I know you're trying to grow the business and you got the next generation involved. And shout out to the boys, Rich and Al and co. I appreciate you spending time to share that journey. And I think it's a really good summary of something I haven't spent time on in this talk in the interest of time, the importance of, and we have research information on it as well that'll be in the best practice guide, the importance of weaning on time, recovering that ewe lamb, and if you do it well, you're setting her up for a lifetime production. So brilliant contribution, Charlie, and sorry to drive that into your holiday while your efficient farm is running well home.
That's all right. Have you got the next slide, Tromphy, of the scales?
No, it disappeared for some reason, so I'm letting you down on that, but give them a burst on using their scales as we wrap up.
Well, our weighing system is permanently set up, and the last thing you want when you've got the lambs in the yards is to have to roar over to the auger or another vehicle to get a battery to weigh your lambs. Ours is permanently set up, so it's so easy to run them in. It's an efficient system. We can do 500 an hour. All our ewe lambs have been weighed now, and we're going to record what goes on every time we re-weigh them, so we'll understand growth rates. And I just think if you've got a good setup, you'll actually start measuring to manage. But you're dead right. I've actually got to go now because I've just been summoned, and because I'm in Merimbula, New South Wales, where it's lovely and green, and I don't want to go home where it's brown. But anyway, all the best.
No, thanks heaps for your time, Charlie, and I appreciate it. It is all about measure to manage, which is a similar catch cry that has gone out in extension for adult ewes. It's imperative in ewe lambs. The details are there for myself or Alana. The webinar series coming up to follow this, and the dates are going to sit there as we have a chat now for 10 minutes with some questions. But thank you very much again to MLA as a collective, all the farmers involved, and a big shout out to Tomo over at Murdoch in WA, and the AgVic crew and QB and that, if they're listening. We've all worked collaboratively on this for years, and I think it's coming together into something that can make a real difference for the industry and help people to use this cohort more effectively and more appropriately. So thanks heaps for your time, and we'll go to questions, Alana. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason, and thank you, Andrew and Charlie, for jumping on and providing your insights and experiences as well. It's greatly appreciated. So we do have a couple of questions. So the first one is, what about if ewe lambs are already at 55 kilos to 60 kilos at joining? Do they still need to grow at 150 grams a day?
No. If you look at the matrix, you can start to back off. Say if they're 50 plus, you can slow them down a little bit. Got to do it appropriately, but no, the target backs off. So it's the more hard work I'm going to flip that question a little bit, Alana, and say the more hard work you do early, the less you have to do late. And the problem at the moment in the industry is the opposite to that question. People are getting ewe lambs pregnant light, and for every 5 kilos you're lighter at joining, you've got to gain 10 to 15 kilos more during pregnancy, and the reverse applies. We've still got to keep that animal growing, but not as fast a rate is the answer to your question, and our matrix will cover that.
Thanks, Jason.
It does cover that, yeah.
Next one, is there a weight gain that is too high over the course of pregnancy?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We, as the matrix shows, we didn't find that. I think you need to be So if I talk that through, remember the number one cause of lamb loss in ewe lambs is too small a birth weight. Our industry is paranoid about too low a birth weight, which is leading to a lack of pregnancy nutrition, low birth weights, less energy in the ewe lamb to bear the lamb. And as Gordon Rafshorgi was listening, there's a stopwatch on from that first contraction to when the lamb suckles. And he's very passionate about what I call secondary dystocia. And that's hypoxia during birth. And so the ewe lamb's got to have the energy to bear this lamb and get up and do the job. And we didn't find an upper ceiling. No doubt there would be one, but keep them growing appropriately if your standard reference weight for your adults is in the 60s somewhere, regardless of breed, you need that ewe lamb to be 60 plus at the point of lambing, because of all the conceptus and weights you'll drop out. But we did not find a downside of growing them quicker in the singles or the twins.
Thanks, Jace. What advice do you have to turn the ewe lamb around between lambing and second year joining?
Yeah, right. I didn't present this because I knew we weren't going to have time, but the foundation of this cake is what you do in the first year. So the heavier she is at the start and the heavier she is at her first lambing is the better it'll set her up for a second joining. So we'll have information on that we'll present in the best practice guide. But if you've joined them to lamb over 5 weeks, I would be weaning their lambs at latest 13 to 14 weeks from the start of the lambing, earlier if you can perfect it. And the sooner you can get the recovery into the ewe lamb, the better she'll perform the next year. And one of the people that's really good at that is Andrew Hunter, that just hung up. And he gets that ewe lamb back and recovered if she's in, low 2 scores somewhere. He gets them back over 3, not over 3 months. He gets them back with intervention, so feeding them up rapidly, and gets them back in condition within 30 or 40 days post-weaning. And that appears to be delivering consistent second scanning outcomes. So wean on time, and as Charlie said, continue to treat that ewe lamb as a ewe lamb. Do not wean her and box her in with older age groups that are a completely different energy requirement and a bit of protein as well, for getting that ewe lamb that's still developing to finish off her growth and recover.
Thanks, Jace. So we've probably got time for 1, maybe 2 more. Is there an age effect in addition to weight and gain? Asking in terms of maintaining the annual cycle and having enough time to recover post-weaning.
I reckon this person's asked this question because they've watched me before and know I didn't have time to present this. But absolutely there's an age effect. And I'm going to qualify this with our genotypes that have been represented to date. So what I'm saying is, instead of joining the ewe lamb at 7 months to lamb back at 12 months on her birthday, most people are offsetting that by about 6 weeks. And so they're joining them at 8 to 9 months rather than on 7 months. Cribbing from 7 months